Okay, why don't we start with the main picture right here and tell us who it is and...
Okay. This is a picture that comes directly from Russia. It was taken in Russia. And this is my great-grandfather, George Peter Thurn, and his wife, Christina. And they stayed in Russia along with the five of their children.
Do you know what happened to them after everybody else left Russia? What happened to them?
He died in 1903, and I don't quite remember. She died some time later, and I don't know. I don't have any picture of all their children. Now, this is my grandfather, Frederick, and his wife, and like I mentioned this morning, there were 10 others. And I should mention at this point probably that one of his brothers and one of his brother-in-law, in about 1919, when the Bolsheviks kind of took over or tried to, those two were amongst a group of farmers that wanted to protest the action against the Germans that lived in Russia at that time. And apparently it got out of hand and both were murdered by those Bolsheviks, apparently with a hatchet. There was one other fellow that was with him. He escaped. He went into a cornfield hid in a cornfield and apparently escaped. But that's kind of a important part.
So your grandfather then never came over to the United States?
Oh yeah.
He did?
They came, my grandfather came over in 1884 and went to South Dakota. I think it's like Menno, South Dakota. His two older sisters had left Russia or the Ukraine there in the late 1870s and settled in that Yankton, South Dakota area. So they came over and they spent the winter with them. And then the next spring, they came up to McIntosh County near the Sealand area, homesteaded, and that's where all their children, their 11 children, were born in that area.
Your grandmother, what's her name?
Her name was Christina Schneid, and she was also from Kassel, Russia, and I don't know all that much about her, about her family. I do have some names and so on, but other than that, I don't have too much information on her.
Were they married when they came over?
Yeah.
Did they have any kids when they traveled over?
Yeah, they had one daughter. Actually, yeah, he was married with one child, and his brother was single. His brother came over with him, and a sister who was married, and I think they had a child too. They all three came over at the same time, and actually stayed in South Dakota next spring. They all three went to Ashley, applied for a homestead, and all had farms in the Sealand area.
Did you know your grandparents?
No. Yeah, they both died I think one was 27 and one was probably 28. So I never did get to know them. My sisters got to know them.
Okay. Any other pictures on this wall that we need to...
I should tell you one incident about my grandfather.
Okay.
So I mentioned that they came over here, in homesteaded in 1885. And you know, things were really tough for them when they came over. So in 1886 or 1887, he and his brother and brother-in-law decided they would sell some buffalo bones that they had picked up. So they took 3 wagon loads of buffalo bones, loaded them up, and headed for Sisseton, South Dakota, which is about 60 miles from their home place. And it was a 3-day there, 3-day back affair. Well, they took them down, sold them. There was a train at Sisseton at that time. Sold their bones, and then they bought their supplies, flour and some other things that they needed, and headed for home. And by the way, the wagons were pulled with oxen. And on the way home, one of my grandfather's, one of his oxen got a bad leg, got something in the bad leg, and it kind of slowed him down. Well, they didn't know what to do. So my grandfather had bought a pair of shoes. You know, they had the high leather shoes. And so he decided, well, that leg needed to be bandaged. So he took his boot, wrapped it around the oxen's bottom joint, and apparently did the trick, and they went on their way home and got the job done. Okay, now, and this was the companion to that. That was the Schneid family in Russia. Again, I can't tell you too much about that. And then this is the Kimmett, my Kimmett grandparents. That's the one that we have the confirmation certificate and also the church transfer when they left. They grew up in Glickstal, and they came over in 1897 when my mother was about 6 months.
Was she the only one that was alive at the time of the children?
Yeah, she was the only one that had been born.
Did you know these grandparents at all?
Oh yeah, yeah. The grandmother I did get to know quite well. My grandfather died in 1933, a year after my father had died. And all I can remember, we were out haying, and somebody came and mentioned that he had died of a stroke. So my grandmother lived with, she had her family, I think at least two sons of her family on the farm yet at that time. So she lived with her 2 sons, remained on the farm until about 1936, and then moved to Wishick. Now, my sisters tell me that when we were youngsters, and our farm was about a mile and a half from theirs, from the grandparents'. So we as kids would take the wagon, and a little wagon, red wagon or whatever it was, and walk down to grandmother's place. And she'd always welcome us. She'd either have some goodies that she bought, or she'd make some rice pudding that my sister says was very good. And then after she had moved to town, we'd visit her in town quite regularly. And during the summer, us grandkids would stay with her for a week at a time or so. And that I can remember well, when I stayed with her in town. she was just a very caring, friendly grandmother, and took good care of us. And I can't remember too many of the stories that she, told, or what she had to say about life. But
Would she play
yeah,
with you when you would stay with her? Would she play games with you or anything?
I think so. Yeah, she. Oh, another thing that my sister tells about her that is kind of unique. In the farm that they had, there was a pasture close by, maybe quarter, half mile. And when it was time to bring the cows in from the pasture, she had a unique whistle, and she'd whistle, and the cows would hear it, and they'd come on home. So it was kind of unique. She did marry for a second time in, let's see, 36, about 1940. She married for a second time to a Mr. Rudolph, who also had a farm outside of Wishick. And I remember her coming to visit our house. She and her husband, her second marriage, and that must have been close around Christmas time. And that's really the last visit I remember she had made for us. She then that February, she got sick and she died of pneumonia. So that took care of my last grandparent.
How old were you?
I was 14 at the time of her death.
Do you remember her funeral?
Yeah, that I specifically remember. How she was buried in our little country church, and we walked after the service in the church, we walked to the grave and where we had the graveyard service.
Do you know if that service was in German or was it in English?
It was all German. And they always had a certain song, so nimm dem, let's see, meine Hände, I think was always one of the songs after the pastor had done the commentation. That song would be sung by all the people together. And they are buried in the same cemetery of that little Lutheran church that my father is buried there.
That top picture is your father and mother?
Yep, that's when they were young. That is my oldest sister in the picture.
What were your parents' names again, just for the...
Okay, his name was His name was Friedrich, and my father's name was Friedrich also, but he was always known as Fred W. And my mother was Rosina Kimmett, and that's, like I mentioned, Esther.
So I know you were 5 when your father passed away. Do you have any memories of him?
Not really.
Yeah.
No, like I mentioned this morning, right about that time, I know I was, with him in the probably laid in the same bed when he died, because I was laid up with bad legs at the time.
And how about your mother? When you think back, how would you describe her?
My mother was a very caring person. I feel that because she was left, she had a hard life after my father died, and probably was somewhat overwhelmed, and maybe was a little bitter or because of the situation she was left in. She never did remarry, but so I think our family situation was probably somewhat different than the other relatives where both the father and mother were present, because our situation was different.
Do you know how your mother met your father?
No, I don't. Well, maybe I should. I think what had happened in those days, it was still matchmaking, where it was an arranged marriage, and that probably didn't help the situation either.
So when you think back to your childhood, your mother, how would she express affection to the children? How would she show her affection, her love?
Like the old Germans, there was no hugging, no saying "I love you." It was she took good care of us and provided for us, and I think that we, being I was the youngest, I was probably a little closer to her, because I would be, being there was no husband on the farm, families visited each other like Sunday afternoons and at different times. So I would be the one that would be going with her or take her to visit different her sisters, brothers, and or other aunts and uncles. And then later on, when she decided to move off the farm and decided to build a house in town, I probably did. We all tried to help, and we had somebody, a carpenter, that really was the main builder. But I think I got involved more in getting that house, squared away, and helped her get that house ready for her to move in.
When you guys were growing up, how would she discipline you if you guys got a little bit out of line?
Well, lectures, and but no spanking or anything like that, I don't think.
Okay. Any other pictures that you wanted to go over?
Yeah, I've got some upstairs. Now over here, let's see, the rest of my family, as you know, this is my mother in her later years then, and this is my sister next to me, and she lives with her husband, Wilbert Birch, here in South Dakota, and they have 3 children. And this is next up then is my brother Alvin, and he's married to Dolores Storr, and she's from Eureka, South Dakota. And he took over the farm when Mother moved to town. In fact, he farmed with Mother till he got married, and as such took over the family farm and still owns it, actually, and it's rented out on a cash basis. Then this is my other sister Leah, and being one of the older ones, she was one of the big helpers to Mother when they grew up, and did a lot of farm work too on the farm. And she then moved to town early and worked at a store in town, met a serviceman in, I think, the 50s, was married only 4 months when he went back, and he died in Korea, I think it was, of a blood clot in his leg. Then she moved out to Lodi, California, and went to work there. And then after some years, she married Harold Grasmick there, and they still live in Lodi, California. And she's the one that we have been going on trips with now for a number of years. And then my oldest sister, Esther, she and I should mention, yeah, she and Leah actually, when we were on the farm early on, during the Depression, when times were tough, they were hired out to other people, and they did housework and different kind of work to help Mother. And Esther was working in a cafe in Wishick when she met a friend of hers who had lived in Fargo, and that friend asked her that she could get much better wages in Fargo than she could at Wishick. So she moved to Fargo when she was 19 years old and has lived there most of her life, in fact. And they had one daughter, and she married Bernie Armstead. And actually, they were married when he was in the service already. And then she followed him to some of the camps that Army camps where he was at. And then when he got out of the service, they settled down in Fargo, and they lived in Fargo all their life, and practically. And they had one daughter, and she died. She married and was a school teacher in Wahpeton, Breckenridge area, but she died in, I think, when she was about 45 years of age. She died of cancer. So, but she does have 2 grandchildren yet, and now has, I think, 2 great-grandchildren. And in fall of 2000, well, let's see, 2 years ago, it'll be 2 years ago, 2 years in November, that she's been in a nursing home in Wishick, because dementia and Alzheimer's. And we're kind of responsible for helping her get moved and settled out, and then I'm kind of the guardian of her affairs. Let's see, that takes care of my sisters and brothers. And that's a picture early on when we were still young. I would imagine that was taken in late 30s, somewhere in the late 30s. And that's the same crew now when we're up and mature. That's just a little more mature. This picture here is, we talked about our country school this morning, and this is where all 5 of us went to school. And it happens that all 5 of us are on this picture. And I'm the little guy here with his head down. But yeah, Leah, Harold, Ernan, Alvin, we're all on there. So they had quite a crew. Teachers had quite a crew when they had that many. Okay, this is my baptismal certificate. Again, I was baptized in that little country church, and it's signed by it was in German, and we always had to have sponsors, and it has the signatures of my sponsors on there also.
So who were your sponsors?
John and Elizabeth Caseman.
Did you know them when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, I got to know their family. They lived about 2 miles or so from us. They were also members of that little country church.
Were they relatives or just friends?
Just friends. And this I'm very proud of. This happens to be the confirmation of my grandfather, which took place in the Glickstal Lutheran Evangelical Lutheran Church that where they grew up, and where we were able to visit that church and see where they went. And again, it's in German, and it's signed by the pastor, 29, dated confirmed on 29 March 1892 in the Evangelical Lutheran Church. This is my mother's confirmation, and I should have mentioned that she was confirmed in what we call the big church near Sealand. We had five. There was five parishes that were served by one pastor, and she grew up near the big, what we call the big church, and she was baptized in the September 10th, actually, she was born 28th September, was baptized the 10th of October 1897 at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church. And I should mention that this St. Andrew's Church, we have a better picture of it, that it was over there. All of us, 5 kids, were also confirmed at that church. And what we'd have to do is, being that was about 10 miles from our farm, we had 2 weeks of solid, daily confirmation. So again, my parents would take us over, and we'd stay with an uncle who lived close by for those 2 weeks till we were confirmed. This is my confirmation, and even though I got confirmed in 1941, let's see, that's not dated, but anyway, we still were confirmed in German. We had a pastor that had come directly from Germany, and he wasn't about to do anything in English. And that still went on for a couple of years after that. Eventually, it was just.
So you said you stayed with an uncle for 2 weeks while you were confirmed? What was that like, staying over there?
That was fun. We didn't mind. All my sisters and brothers stayed there. Some more cousins that were confirmed. So they were kind of the mainstay until their transportation became a little more better, But
what was confirmation like for you? What did you have to do to be confirmed?
Okay, we did a lot of memorizing, Bible verses, a lot of, and the creed, the Lord's Supper, okay, so that was the one main aspect of it. The other one was reading the stories, and what was used at the time was called Biblische Geschichte. It's Bible stories, the stories of the Bible. So we would he would lecture on those, and so those were the 2 main things. And at the end of 2 weeks, then there were 2 parts of confirmation. One was where we had kind of a test, and actually that happened it actually happened on our confirmation day. He gave us tests right along, but before we could get confirmed, on confirmation day, we'd be up on the stage, and he'd ask us to recite certain Bible verses, and that kind of was our test. And then the main part of it was, we got confirmed which was a ceremony in itself where we got the certificates, and then we had our first communion.
So the Bible verses that you had to recite, did you know which ones you had to recite before you got up there?
No. Those are the ones that we had learned during the confirmation sessions.
Do you remember who the pastor was?
Reverend Fryman. I don't remember his first name, but yeah, Freymann.
How did the youth feel about him? Was he somebody approachable or kind of scary?
Pretty staunch, you know. He had his way, and we knew we had to toe the line. And it was interesting, but today's youth probably wouldn't go over too big.
So what denomination were you?
Lutheran, which is the ELCA today. But at that time, it was still American Lutheran, basically all German Synod.
And how many children were confirmed at the time you were?
That varied. I think when my sisters got confirmed, they had in the 20s, about 20, maybe even closer to 30. By the time I got confirmed, we had about 9, and this is the crew I was confirmed with.
Do you remember any of the people you were confirmed with?
Oh yes, I remember all of them. I think at least 2 or 3 have died since.
Can you identify them in the picture?
Okay, I'll try. This is Herbert Wiest. This is a Milbert Thurn. This is Ernest Steffen. That's myself. That's a Lang, a lady by the name of Lang. That's Edna Just. She passed away. And that's another Just. And that's a Caseman girl from she and I were from our little church. See, all the 5 churches, all the kids came together and as a class.
So what church did you attend when you were growing up?
Little country church that was served by this pastor, as I mentioned. And he'd come, the pastor would come and preach a sermon once every 3 weeks. During the other Sundays, we had what they called Vorsteher, or let's see, what are they, deacon, they're called now. And they would have the service. They would read a book where they had a book of sermons that they used for that. And we had Sunday school.
What was Sunday school like?
Again, I know we started out with the ABC book, which was an ABC book, and that's actually where we learned German. We learned how to read German in Sunday school, and then we also had Bible books that we used for.
So when you were growing up, did each one of the kids have their own Bible in their house?
Not really. No, I don't. When we got confirmed, we got a songbook. I remember that. But the Bible, no. That's odd. I have never, thought of that. It really should have been a Bible, but it was the songbook that we used to sing in church. So.
What's this up here?
Okay, I mentioned this morning that I enlisted in the National Guard in the fall of 1950. I was still teaching school at the time. So when we got our orders to evacuate, for activation, And so we trained in Wishick for about a month, and then we were all shipped to Camp Rucker, Alabama. And we were the artillery battalion. We worked with these 155 howitzers. And our unit from Wishick was the service battery. Our job was to haul the guns and do whatever was necessary to keep them going. So this was taken, I think, in 1952 of the whole battalion that we were part of.
So you said in 1950 you decided to enlist into the National Guard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to enlist?
That's a good question. I don't know if I ever quite figured it out. But I think what had happened, see, they were drafting for the Korean War. And I figured, rather than be drafted, I'd enlist with the local unit and take my chances with them. And I think it was the right decision.
How long did you serve for?
About 18 months. Our unit, in fact, the whole division, 64th Infantry Division, when we were at Camp Rucker, Alabama, we never did get called to active duty in Korea as a unit. What happened that as they needed replacements for other units in Korea, they would take them out of our infantry unit and ship them to Korea. And I was a battery clerk, and this was our day room. This was our barracks where the fellows that stayed on camp, and the battalion headquarters was in here, and I was a clerk for our unit in the battalion headquarters, which suited me fine. Being a clerk as such, I didn't have to stand inspections. I didn't have to do KP. I didn't have to walk guard. So, and being I wasn't called to duty in Korea in August then, and see, we were activated in January of 51. By August 52, the Korean War was winding down. So people who had jobs in their home communities or wherever, line of work they were in, could get an early discharge. And as I was a school teacher before, they let me out so I could get back home to get back to teaching in September. So August 18th, I was gone.
So during your time you served, where did they have you stationed? Like, did you visit different places, or?
No, we were right here, except for, I think, one spring. The whole infantry division went to Texas for maneuvers where we had practice. It was a practice with other units in the country. So that was in our practice exercises. I remember I was with some guys, and we just about got captured by some other unit, on the practice part of it. So that's the closest I got to combat. Probably the one that has the most memory is when we had basic training. We had to go through bivouac training, and I don't know what they called it, but anyway, we had this exercise where we had to crawl on the ground under some wires and so on, and real life bullets went went overhead. So we had to make sure we had to keep our head down. That was the scariest thing that I probably experienced.
Did anybody ever get injured?
I don't think so.
Do you know where you are in this picture?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so right there.
Okay, we'll start with this document here. What is this?
Okay, this is called parochial shine, and actually what it is a church transfer. And being that my grandparents, Jacob and Rosina Kimmett, were a member of the Glickstall Lutheran Church, when they left for America in 1897, the pastor wrote out what we call today a transfer for them, indicating that they were Lutherans, that they had been baptized and confirmed in the church over there, and then also the baptism of their child that they took with them, which is my mother, Rosina Kimmett. This transfer then came to what was at the time the St. Andrew's Lutheran Parish. And when the Thurn settlers, all the people that came over earlier in the 1800s yet, they built this, what is called the first church. And this was built, like I mentioned, in the late 1880s, and is what is called like a sod house. It's made of sod. The walls are actually about 2 feet thick. And this church is still standing today, and it's on the National Historic Register. So,
And what's the name of the church?
St. Andrew's Lutheran Church. So in about 1906, they built this church. And this is the church then where we all got confirmed, when I mentioned where we got confirmed, and which was served as the main church for the 5 parishes that were part of this, served by the same pastor.
So can you tell me a little bit about what church services were like when you were growing up?
Okay, like I mentioned, it was always Sunday school first, and then we'd have the regular service, and it was a traditional service where the pastor led the service. We'd sing hymns, prayers, sermon, and at that time, communion was not every Sunday, or not even every month like it is today. At that time, the communion services were basically Easter and Christmas. So when we had communion, everybody had to announce themselves to go to communion, and so that was about the extent of it. I think it was and like I mentioned earlier, the pastor would come to our small churches about once every 3 weeks, and on alternate times he'd have service at one church, travel even with the horses which were probably 8-10 miles apart, and travel to the next church and have services in the afternoon. And then they served the other 2 churches, and then the 3rd Sunday he'd be back in his own congregation.
So when you were growing up, do you remember when you did get your first Bible?
I probably didn't get it till about the time we were married.
Did your mother have a Bible in the house?
Oh, yes. In fact, she kept a record. In fact, even my grandparents, I used it in my genealogy study, where what they always did, they listed all the children who, when they were baptized, when they were married, grandchildren, and I still have the Bible from my mother, or where she put in the list everybody. And a lot of times that came in pretty handy, to find out how many children they had when they were born, baptized, married, that type of thing.
So how important when you were growing up was religion to your family?
Very important. Yeah, we didn't miss too many Sundays.
This church here, is this the same church your wife attended, or no, just you? Okay. What do we have next?
Okay, I think I'll. By the way, okay, this is the same church I just showed you. And this is the little St. Paul's church that was out in the country that I attended, that all of us attended.
How far again was that from your farm?
Only about 3 miles.
Since you grew up with only, really, your father passed away when you were 5, so did your mother learn to drive, or how?
Yeah.
She did learn to drive a car.
She drove to Aberdeen, Bismarck, and wherever we needed to go. I don't know if she drove to Fargo. I think by the time one of us boys drove.
Was that pretty uncommon back then for a woman to be driving around?
Yeah.
Do you know what type of car she had when you guys were growing up?
I remember, it was an old Chevrolet, but when I really where I learned to drive, I think was a 1940s, early 40s Chevrolet. I remember using a 1927 Chevrolet truck that we kept on, I think, till I think, for thrashing, and then still when I grew up, I remember hauling grain. We'd shovel grain from the granary into the truck and haul it into town, or when we were thrashing, sometimes we'd haul it to town, or I should say combining. When we were combining, we could do that too.
Okay, should we talk about these pages here first?
I think we covered. See,
Okay.
we covered all of these.
That was the one on the wall downstairs?
Yeah, that's my folks, and that's my mother. That's too hard to see. That's my Kimmett grandparents with my mother when she was still young. And maybe this one this was our first combine when we farmed, when I was gone. Well, I still helped with farming at that time, and that's my mother in the box where we unloaded the grain, and that's the 1940s Ellis Jelmer with my brother driving it. I don't think that's me. That's my brother, and yeah, this tractor was bought in the wartime, during World War I, where tires, were tough to get, So, as you can see, it was bought, and then it had what we call steel wheels with lugs, what we call lugs on there. No tire. Neither was the front. So that's kind of a sidelight. Predates you.
Do you know when you guys first got your tractor, or did you always have a tractor on the farm when you were growing up?
No, this was the first one. in the 1940s. So
You were still on the farm at that time, weren't you, in 1940?
yeah,
How
I
did the
helped.
tractor change farming for you?
that was quite a change, yeah. From that, you know, now horses were still used for various things, you know, for hauling hay, for manure and doing all kinds of things. So we, I don't know when horses they were reduced. In other words, instead of having 8, 10 horses, they'd probably have 4 and then eventually maybe 2. So yeah, they come, and nowadays there's hardly any, you don't hardly see a horse on a farm anymore, except for riding purposes.
Was it hard for your family to come up with the money to buy its first tractor?
I'm not sure. It was, because this was a used combine, and it gave us a lot of trouble. But the tractor was new, and I'm sure it took a while to get it paid off.
What type of tractor was it?
Ellis Chalmers.
And where did you get it from?
From Wishick, the same place that had the Chevrolet. It was a Chevrolet dealer. In addition to cars, he also sold Ellis Chalmers tractors.
Did your mom ever drive the tractor?
If she did, it was very little. By then, my brother was the one that, and I used to. I know I was out there plowing with that thing a lot of times, you know, while I was still on the farm.
Your brother was how many years older than you?
5.
So when your father died and he got older, did he kind of take the father role over in your family?
To a degree, but I think Mother was still basically the head honcho.
She was the one not to mess with?
In a way. Yeah, she ruled the roost.
Is she wearing pants out here, or is
Yeah.
she wearing a dress?
No, I think she's wearing pants.
Did she wear pants often when she was out working?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Okay.
Okay. Tell you a little bit about the farm. Okay, this farm was purchased by my grandfather in 1905. And I think it had, well, I don't know how many buildings it had but there was another house. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. This house was built in 1928, a year after I was born. But anyway, he bought it, and I think my grandfather farmed it until my dad got married in 1916, and then my grandfather signed it over to my father for $1. I think he paid $3,200 for, I think it was the 320 acres that this farm was on. Now, like I had mentioned, all 5 of us were born in another house. So I was always wondering, what, you know, was it a sod house or what kind of house was it? And it apparently had been built by a previous owner. So, but it was a wooden structure. So I told my 2 sisters, why don't you draw me a picture of what the house looked like, or you know, that. And so my oldest sister drew this picture of the farm, and I don't know if you might even take a shot of it. Apparently the upstairs was used for a playroom, and then I think in the summer it was also used for sleeping upstairs. But in the wintertime, the whole family slept in this. It was a two-room house, so the whole family slept in this room, which was a combined living room and bedrooms. There was one bed in there that it's like a beds that swing out, or make a couch into a bed. But this was a cabinet. It was just like and then it would fold down, and this would be three kids at least would sleep on there. The other bedroom was there. There was a little entryway, and then this was the kitchen, and actually that was where they lived in. And then there was a big garden right next to it, where all the plant and garden vegetables were grown.
What does this say?
It's
berries?
it's some kind of berries, green. That beats me. I can't even tell you. And Esther and Lee, my older sister, they had play garden out there. So I figured, well, I'm going to make a picture of it. So I made this drawing of what it most likely looked like a 16 by 24 house, and with the what they called the four-hyso. And again, this how is what the rooms would have looked like. There was a little stairs upstairs, and the bedroom and the kitchen.
That is impressive. That is beautiful.
I was a draftsman at one time, so.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So I thought that.
That's great with the family. You should do that for your own house, the one you grew up in.
Yeah.
And actually break it up into the rooms.
Yeah.
That would be beautiful.
Oh, I told you this was this then is what we call our new house that we moved into
Let's write it down so
in 1928. I was born in 27, so I was a year old. There was a basement, and the front part of the basement we used to live in the summer. Actually, I think we used it for winters sometimes too. But that was our kitchen. And also downstairs then was a room that was the pump. There was an indoor pump, water pump, with a cellar, a dugout cellar, which was 8 feet deeper yet. And so we had this for that period of time. My father really looked ahead. We had water in the house, and we also had an electrical system. It was what they called at that time a 32-volt system, which had some big batteries. I think there were about 8 big batteries, and then we had an engine that charged the battery. We had to run that engine every week to charge up those batteries, and then we had light for a week. And then there was a cellar that had, and then a furnace room and washroom. We used it as a washroom too. And that, again, the furnace room was that lignite forced air, or furnace that we heated the whole house with. And then another room was a coal room, where in the fall we'd haul lignite coal and then use the coal enough to last us to heat the house all winter. And
Where would they get the coal from?
They get it from Wishick, I think, most of the time. I think early on there were some mines around, like at Wilton, and you could get it directly from a coal mine. But the coal here at this time were all shipped into by train into Wishick, and they'd get a carload of coal in, and then the people would come in with wagons and trucks and load the coal and haul it out to their farms. The second floor had, again, a kitchen and dining room, a living room, and one bedroom. And then upstairs were four bedrooms. And at that also a little room. I mentioned this morning that they would go to Cullum or someplace and take some wheat in, have it ground into flour and bring it back. Well, that flour needed a dry place. So they'd keep it in the house, like in our case, there was a room upstairs that they'd keep the sacks of flour in and other stuff that needed to be kept dry. So
is this the outhouse then over here?
yeah, every farm had outhouses.
And are these your fields
Yeah,
here?
my brother has planted a shelter belt around it, and it did not include, there was no garage at the time. There was a four-heisly, or a little entryway there. This wasn't there, but this, and this, they were the main, they were there when I remember the farm. And I'm not sure, like I mentioned, the farm was bought, whether some of those buildings were there or whether my father and his father built them yet.
When you were growing up, where would you play when you were a kid? Where did you usually play?
Oh, basically around the house. I think the garage was a place where we'd kept like those homemade toys was probably there. But a lot of time was, especially winter, a lot of time was spent in the barn. That's where the cows were milked, the horses kept, that was kind of the center of activity. So.
The roads coming and going to your farm when you were growing up, were they like this, or how were they like?
Okay, we came out of the farm about a quarter mile east, and then there was a section line that we had to either go north or south, depending if we went to Wishick or went to Venturia. And they were regular just trails for a long time, but now, then later on they build gravel roads, and there's still gravel roads now to the nearest main roads. So like going into Wishick or Venturia, Ashley.
Where did you get water from?
There's a windmill here, right here, it's hard to see. I think at that point it probably didn't have a head anymore. So yeah, the water well. And this shed that my brother, this was the milk machine and separating, but the shed wasn't there at the time.
What year do you think this picture was taken?
That's later on when my brother lived on it. I'd say somewhere in the 60s.
Okay. That's great.
Okay, now I don't know. Okay, this is my graduation picture.
You had glasses in high school?
Yeah, in fact, this morning, remember I told you I was cross-eyed?
Oh, yeah.
And I've worn glasses ever since. Yeah.
So where would you go to get glasses? Did you have to go all the way to Bismarck?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and this is the high school class, 26 of us. And we still have reunions every so often. And again, I couldn't tell you right now, a good number of them have passed since also, several. And I think that's me down there.
So your suit, is it a store-bought suit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mother would sew the girls' dresses for a long time, but not for us.
Would you buy them in Wishick, or would you get them out of a catalog, or?
Oh, the pants and shirts we were able to buy in Wishick, but especially later on, Wish it was, they had everything, but later on, we made trips to either Aberdeen or Bismarck to buy clothes and different, to some.
Growing up, did you know Delmer Zimmerman or Dolores Boschee Zimmerman? How about Gus Warner?
I know who they are. Oh yeah, Gus Warner. He's in the nursing home now. I guess his wife is in there, and he's. Oh yeah, yeah. I talk to him a lot of times when I'm down to visit my sister there. He's quite a talker. Yeah. And I mentioned I was part of the FFA class, and this was one of the, I think the early, when I was a freshman, I'm the littlest guy in there. But yeah, that was one of my organizations.
So can you tell me a little bit about what the FFA, what type of activities you would do with them when you were a kid?
Well, they were, they're still they're still doing some of the same things, only more technology and advanced methods. But yeah, we learned all about farming. That was the basic thing. We learned about crops, livestock, machinery, carpentry, and so basically that was it.
For people that may not know, what does FFA stand for?
Future Farmers of America.
And in this picture, do you have any of your buddies, any of your close friends when you were in high school?
Oh yes.
Can you point them out?
Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, he was in my class. I know him. I knew all of them. And there was a guy Leo Vossler, I think that's him. He went on to NDSU and became a vocational agriculture teacher. And I think that's about all. But the rest of us, we ended up here and there. I think if I would also went into that area, but when I graduated from high school, and that's the thing that's so different now. We really didn't have any counseling in terms of careers, and so of course the other thing there was no money. My mother didn't have money to send me to college, and we didn't know about loans and different ways to finance education. So that's why after I graduated from high school, my choice, like the majority of the others, we started teaching country school. So like I mentioned, I taught country school then from when I graduated, in 1944. My first school was 14 kids, and what we were required to do was to take a test. The county school superintendent of schools. I didn't even go to summer school that summer. We had to take a test, and if we passed it, we were given authorization to teach school. And I know my first school was at my uncle and aunt's school, where I was able to board then during the winter. And I had 14 kids, all grades, probably guys 3 years younger than me. I was 17 when I started, teaching. And how I ever got through it, and it's actually, when you think back, that was a crime it was not only hard for us that had to go into a situation like that, but it was bad for the kids, how could, the material we had to work with and the time, we didn't have the necessary preparation that was required, but that's that was life at that time. So that's what I did then from 1944 to end of 1950 when I then went into the service.
Okay.
So that's me in the Army.
How old were you when you enlisted?
I think I was 22, around 22.
Okay. And you were with the National Guard?
Yep.
Why did you choose the National Guard?
That was right there. Somebody from, so.
These photographs, when you would have them taken, did you have to pay for them or did they give them to you?
I think I had to pay.
You had to pay for them.
Most likely.
You have them, okay?
Okay. And so this is the unit that at Wishick. These were all then that belonged to the Wishick's one service battery, and 88 of us that left then in January of '51 for Camp Rucker, Alabama. And from there on, I think about half of them ended up in Korea. Nobody was killed in action. One of them then I think stayed in the service and was killed later on. And we all were able to get back home. And we've had a number of reunions. We try to get together every so often. And every year there's less and less. And I think right now out of the 88 that were joined at the time, about half of them are gone, passed away.
Where are you at in here?
No, you got me. Right there. Yeah,
Oh.
that's the one. It's the picture there, right? And that was taken, yeah, early on, before we left, actually.
So can you tell me a little bit, okay, when you enlisted, what was training like, basic training?
Well, the guys that were in the Guard earlier, they would have, month training, I think it was every other weekend. And then in the summertime, they'd go to Devil's Lake, where there was a training camp for it was actually the National Guard's training camp, where they would do, the regular Army training, like basic training. But in my case, and for the majority of the guys on here, we were greenhorns. We were recruits, actually, and so the first thing we had to do then when we got down to Camp Rucker, Alabama, was go through basic training, where we learned how to shoot the weapons and basically about how to survive in combat. And so with that, we did guard duty, KP.
What's KP?
Kitchen police. Worked in the kitchen, and everybody had take his turn on that. And fortunately, I think after basic training, I became the battery clerk, and so I didn't have to do those chores.
What's a battery clerk responsible for?
Kept all the records of the unit. Actually, one of my main duties was to make out the morning report. Every morning, all the troops were called together, and those that didn't, everybody had to be accounted for. And so we had kept the record, who was there, who wasn't, and all the things that went on.
So what did you think of Alabama?
Hot. It was interesting. We got there in January, and that was kind of nice for us because the weather was a lot nice, it was nice. In fact, but later on in the spring, I remember one time walking guard, and I never froze as much. It was a damp, cold, and I really froze. But yeah, it was interesting, and the people, okay, probably for us from rural North Dakota coming down to to Alabama, one of the first things that we realized, had to contend with was those Southerners with their Southern accent. And in fact, Mildred and I got married in April after basic training. And like I mentioned, we got married, she went home, and then she came back later. And the only housing we could get, because of all the military around, was rent a room in a nearby little town that wasn't too far, with that all we had was a bedroom, and we could use their kitchen to eat in when that. But it wasn't too long after that. I think that only lasted about 2 months, and then we were able to get an apartment near the camp. So that was about life in the camp. Like I said, my service time was quite. To me, it was. I've never been sorry I enlisted, because Mildred was there. A bunch of the guys were married, and at this apartment place there were other couples from the camp, from our unit, that had trailers down there. So we had a good time all down there, and and then when I got out, I was able to go back to school on my military time, get my degree, and I think I had 2 years of college. I'd go back either 1 or 2 quarters, always the summer quarter during the time I was teaching. So by the time I left for the service, I had basically 2 years of college, or at that time, you had to have you could get a standard teaching certificate with 2 years of training. So I had that, and then when I came back, I went back to school, and another 2 years, and I had my degree, and I taught high school for 1 year, and high school. I liked the elementary field, but high school didn't agree too much with me, and so I ended up getting another job with an oil company as a draftsman, because I had taken industrial arts in college, majored then, and then I worked for an oil exploration office here in Bismarck for, I think, from 56 to 61. And then they were going to pull out. The oil activity slowed down, and they were going to move. So I got a job with the North Dakota Job Service, or at that time was called Employment Security Bureau. And I worked there for 26 years till I retired. In fact, I started as an interviewer, and then they needed counselors, or there was a grant. You could get a grant, or they actually sponsored us. If you wanted to go into employment counseling, they would give us time off, 2 summers, I think it was. We got time off with all our expenses paid, and at the end of the 2 years, we were able to get a master's in counseling, and that. So I don't have a good picture, but that was NDSU. Then I got my master's in 1966 and worked as a counselor in Jamestown for up till 73 when I transferred to Bismarck here at the state office as a program administrator, and worked there till 1988 when I retired.